Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, she is a Democrat on the House Committee on Oversight.
Welcome, Congresswoman. It's great to have you at the table. You know, our hearts, first off, go out to the good people of Texas who are going through a very, very tough time right now. You mentioned that you know your concern is not your district, but you may have some folks who may have been affected by that. You also signed on to a letter demanding oversight on the government's response so far. First off, what are the chances of that happening, being in the minority, right?
Yeah.
But the importance of it, though, still remains that we have to see what the government did here or failed to do in responding to this tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things that this government hasn't realized, or this administration does not realize, is that we are supposed to be problem solvers. And instead, what they continue to do is they continue to break things and make it more difficult for us to fix problems that people are facing. When it comes to these emergencies like this, and with us entering hurricane season, which will definitely most likely impact Texas, Louisiana, Florida, North Carolina, as we just kind of go up and down the coast, it is important to understand whether or not this iteration of FEMA is actually functioning for the American people. I know that it sounds good maybe to be like, oh, the governor needs to take care of it, otherwise it's a loser governor. But the reality is that people need to understand this is about resources, right? And so certain states just don't have as many resources as other states, right? The federal government is taking dollars from all of us, and they've got them in this big bucket. It is important that when you need them, that's kind of like our backup. That's our safety, right? And so we're supposed to be able to call them in for these huge disasters. But as we sent off these letters, unfortunately, we are in the minority, but we sent them off to the Inspector General for Commerce. We made sure we sent a letter off to FEMA. We sent a letter off to NOAA, because we want to understand whether or not this administration responded adequately. There are reports that the Secretary, Nome, failed to respond in an adequate time.
It was 72 hours.
72 hours. Seems like a long time. Especially as waters are continuing to rise and people are still lost. In addition to that, we wanted to know, what about these DOJ cuts, right? Let's talk about it. You know, I serve on the DOJ committee. This letter was co-led by Greg Casar, who also serves on Oversight and is from Texas. We need to understand, what was the impact? What does it look like at NOAA? If you've got it down to bare bones, were they able to actually get the information that they needed? And was it just a matter that there was no one there to get that information out? And from Commerce, we want to understand, as it relates to alarms and systems and warning systems, were there people in place to actually warn people? It doesn't seem like any of that existed.
Congresswoman, I am old enough to remember when a natural disaster would strike this country, and it would actually be a unifying moment, and you would have a leader at the national level who would come forward and remind us that this was a time to come together as Americans. It strikes me that this president's response to natural disasters, to crises, is very often bifurcated by whether or not he is talking about red state leadership or blue state leadership. Just listen to his evaluation and critique of a variety of leaders. Take a listen.
I have to tell you, the people here, first responders, the sheriff's office, all of the police, law enforcement, they've done an unbelievable job. Everyone sees what an incredible job the governor did. The federal government is doing a very bad job. They are not doing the job. They don't have people there. They don't have the people. Kamala wined and dined in San Francisco, and all of the people in North Carolina, no helicopters, no rescue. I just got back from a tour of the suffering and devastation in Louisiana. Obama ought to get off the golf course and get down there.
Just a quick note to you and to our viewers: after his trip to Texas, President Trump is heading back to his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. I think it makes it hard for Americans to assess what they are supposed to expect from FEMA when the evaluation from the president seems to shapeshift based around the politics of the moment. We had your colleague, Congressman Moskowitz, on with us. He made the argument that part of the answer, in addition to reform, is removing FEMA from the Department of Homeland Security. Do you agree with his assessment?
I mean, I don't know that that's going to actually fix it. Obviously, Kristi Noem is way in over her head. To have her be the one that kind of has to oversee this and somehow comes up with this idea or is okay with the idea of putting someone over FEMA who does not realize that there is a such thing as hurricane season, who also says something as idiotic as it's not the federal government that does emergency management, seemingly not understanding exactly what FEMA stands for, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, right? So we definitely have a level of incompetence that honestly, I don't know if moving or shifting to a different department is going to fix, because unfortunately, it seems like the only qualifications that this administration has required of the average person to be in this administration is that they be a Fox News host, which ultimately is not a qualification whatsoever. But I can tell you that this idea that he would say things as he's down in Texas and pretend as if this is something that only happens once every 1,000 years or whatever kind of claim he tried to make as he was down in Texas. I'm not quite 1,000 years old, but I can tell you that in the 80s, this very same river had a significant flash flooding.
Local officials on the ground, the people in Texas know that Donald let them down, and other people did as well. The actual first responders do their best, right? You can, like, look, no one's perfect, I suppose, but the actual first responders on the ground, police, firefighters, ambulances, the FEMA staff that are like in local regions or that are deployed to wherever there's a crisis, they are trying their best. But they'll often struggle because as heroic as individuals can be, when systems fail, people pick up the slack, but there's sometimes too much slack. And what you've heard from these officials, you heard Jasmine Crockett there say that Trump failed, local officials in Texas failed, statewide official Texas has failed even. You saw, there was an example, guys, and I don't want to name names. These are small town officials, so I'm not trying to cause a witch hunt, but there was a small town in Texas that had the opportunity to take some money from Biden that could have been spent on things like flood relief, disaster prevention, all of that. And they said, we're not taking money from the devil, Joe Biden. So they rejected federal money under the kind of principle that they didn't want to give Joe Biden any credit for helping, a small Republican town. And lo and behold, this happens. And it gets even worse. And this is why local officials, the ones that are helping, are mad.
Now, Texas State Senator Roland Gutierrez and Deanne Criswell, who served as FEMA administrator in the Biden administration. Thank you both very much for being here. Senator, I would just love to get your reaction to President Trump dismissing questions over response to the flooding and attacking a reporter for raising questions posed by residents.
It's just shameful, quite frankly. I mean, you have a president here who fired 600 National Weather Service employees. 4 of those employees were directly responsible in this region, and they were doged weeks and months before. All of the alerts from the National Weather Service came late. And, different articles have showed, yes, they made alerts along the way. The most serious alerts were already far too late. The response post-flood has been woefully pathetic from FEMA. And it has been pathetic not because of the hardworking employees, but because this administration continually treats the agencies that publicly serve the people of this country like some sort of reality show, rather than understanding that this is the management of the resources of government. When you eliminate those resources of government, you're going to have reckless outcomes. And that is what's happened here. When you couple it with the state lack of resources, the fact is this state has a lot of resources, but Republicans have refused to do anything by way of emergency management or emergency alert systems. We had a Republican put up a bill this session that was killed by the lieutenant governor. The leaders of the state simply don't want to spend on rural Texas.
Dan, you were our last FEMA administrator. It seems that the DHS secretary has a rule that every contract and grant over $100,000 has to be personally approved by her. You obviously worked with the DHS secretary quite a bit. I'm curious if that's like too much. How much of those things are happening? Does this feel sustainable?
One of the key things that FEMA needs to be successful is agility. They have to be able to anticipate what the potential needs are going to be at a state. They need to be able to move resources quickly, even sometimes before a presidential declaration or before the state asks. You do need the declaration to employ them, right, to put them to work. But the agility, that speed is so important. And when you have added layers of approval, it slows that process down and it takes away the one key principle, that agility, that really can make a difference in helping these communities.
State Senator Gutierrez, I want to go back to the funding for the flood early warning systems. It wasn't that local officials and state officials hadn't tried to have some kind of flood early warning system. You know, there was great reporting in the Houston Chronicle just talking about how many different years since 2016, different studies, and they had pushed forward to the legislature trying to get some of the federal funding. But, you know, these requests were always rejected. You had mentioned that it was a lack of concern for rural Texas. Do you think that now, with the Texas legislature going into special session, this will be remedied and there will be a proper flood warning system put in this area of Texas?
Well, now the lieutenant governor has said that we're going to have a proper flood warning system. We should have had that years and years ago. The Texas legislature actually, through the Texas Department of Emergency Management, said that this county did not qualify for those particular grants through FEMA. Listen, we're not talking about 2025 technology. We're talking about 1920s technology. We're talking about these sirens are nothing but bullhorns, a little bit more advanced. I understand that, but we've been doing this for a long time across the United States. The water gauges, this community's asked for them for some time, and they haven't done them. Rural Texas simply doesn't have the kind of resources that they need to do this, but the state of Texas does. We sit on a $20 billion surplus that Republicans that hold the purse strings of this state have refused to allocate to rural Texans. I saw it through the tragedies of Uvalde. I saw radio systems that didn't work, towers that didn't work, technologies that were outdated. We need to do better. Certainly, this session is about that, this special session. But here's the problem. This governor has added redistricting to this mess just so that he can stack the deck for Donald Trump. And so it's going to be very difficult for us to do anything positive in light of that.
And we're going to get to that specific thing later on in this show and certainly tomorrow. But Deanne, one quick question for you. The AP is reporting this morning, it just came out, FEMA removed dozens of Camp Mystic buildings from 100-year flood map before expansion, records show.
Joke at this point? Like, there's a joke like that conservatives will destroy themselves to own the libs, right? To own progressives. That their only goal, their only joy in life is having us be miserable. And it's gotten so bad, guys, that they are willing, some of these Republican politicians are willing to create situations of death just to anger an imaginary liberal or imaginary socialist or progressive or whatever that honestly, at the end of the day, just wants to help them. We are trying to help these people, right? You've seen the data. Like, progressives, they want red states to have better education, better health care, better child care, better rights for women and minorities. They want the average, even straight white men, they want the average straight white men in all of these red states to have better wages, better job security, better protections for them and their families. And what do Republicans want? They would rather, at least some of them, some of these like these MAGA Republicans would rather suffer than build a better life.